A disabled puppy begs the vet not to euthanize him. Then the unthinkable happened. In a cold shelter cage, a tiny, trembling dog reaches out his paw, pleading for his life. The vet is ordered to end it, but something about this puppy feels different. What looks like weakness hides a secret no one could have imagined. Every second ticks closer to a decision that could cost everything. Why was this puppy really marked for death? And what hidden truth will turn one act of mercy into a battle for survival? When rules, loyalty, and danger collide, who will walk away alive? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. Thunder cracked across the pre-dawn sky, rattling the windows of Mesa Vista County Shelter. Dr. Greer Langley flinched at the sound, her tired fingers wrapped around a small syringe as she made her way down the dimly lit corridor to Kennel Y13. The morning's task list lay heavy in her pocket, each paper slip marking another life she was expected to end before sunrise. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the concrete floor. Greer's footsteps echoed in the quiet morning hours, accompanied only by the occasional whimper or rustle from the kennels. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and dark circles under her green eyes betrayed too many nights like this one. As she approached Y13's kennel, she saw him, a small, three-legged puppy with bright eyes that seemed too alert for this early hour. His medical chart labeled him as unadoptable due to frequent tremors, but something about those eyes made Greer pause. "Hey there, little guy," she whispered, kneeling down to the kennel level. The puppy immediately pressed forward against the chain-link door, his tail wagging despite his wobbly stance. Rather than the violent tremors described in his file, Greer noticed his movements seemed more purposeful. As she prepared to unlock the kennel, the puppy suddenly pressed his paw against her wrist through the fence. His eyes locked with hers, and a soft whine escaped his throat. It wasn't the scared whimper she usually heard from dogs who sensed what was coming. This seemed different, almost communicative. Greer paused, watching the pup more closely. His head movements, which had been logged as random tremors in his file, showed a distinct pattern. He wasn't jerking sporadically. He was tracking something. Following his gaze, Greer noticed his ears twitching in response to a faint ticking sound coming from somewhere in the wall. Her own heart fluttered then, that familiar arrhythmia she'd been ignoring for months, and the puppy's reaction was immediate. He raised his paw to her chest, barking with surprising urgency. The sound echoed through the quiet shelter, making Greer wince. "Quiet down there," she whispered, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this dog was trying to tell her something. His focus was too sharp, his reactions too precise for a dog supposedly suffering from neurological issues. "Dr. Langley." The sharp voice cut through her observations like a knife. Director Marla Driscoll stood at the end of the corridor, her severe bob haircut and crisp suit looking oddly out of place in the utilitarian shelter setting. "Is there a problem?" Greer straightened up, conscious of the syringe in her hand and the way the puppy was still pawing at her through the fence. "I was just about to proceed with Y13, she said, though the words felt like ash in her mouth. "Then do so," Driscoll replied flatly. "Policy is clear regarding unadoptable animals. We don't have the resources to house dogs that can't be placed." Her calculating eyes fixed on the clipboard hanging from Y13's kennel. "The paperwork is in order. Proceed." Thunder rolled again outside as Greer looked down at the puppy. He had settled into a sitting position, still maintaining perfect eye contact. His head turned slightly, tracking another sound in the wall that Greer could barely hear. Everything about his behavior contradicted what she was reading in his file. In that moment, years of training and her veterinarian's oath crashed against shelter policy like waves against a cliff. She thought of all the times she'd followed orders, all the times she'd told herself it was for the greater good. But this time, something felt different. Wrong. With deliberate slowness, Greer capped the syringe and slipped it into her pocket. "I need to do another examination," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. There are inconsistencies in his behavior that warrant further observation. Dr. Langley. Driscoll's voice carried a warning edge. The assessment was completed yesterday. The paperwork is final. With all due respect, Director. Greer met Driscoll's stern gaze. My medical opinion supersedes paperwork. This dog is displaying signs of alertness and sensory focus that don't align with his diagnosis. I need to run more tests. The storm outside intensified, rain now pelting against the windows as if nature itself was underlining the tension in the corridor. Driscoll's expression hardened, her lips pressing into a thin line. You're making a mistake, Doctor. This is a liability issue. Greer was already pulling out her notebook, jotting down her observations. I'll take full responsibility for any additional costs or resources, she said, not looking up. But I cannot and will not euthanize an animal when I have reasonable doubt about his diagnosis. The puppy barked again, as if in agreement, and this time Greer didn't try to quiet him. She watched as he continued to track movements and sounds that most humans would miss, his behavior showing clear signs of training rather than disorder. This goes against shelter policy, Driscoll stated coldly. There will be consequences. I understand, Greer replied, continuing to write her observations. She noted the puppy's precise tracking movements, his responsive behavior, and the way he seemed to react to both the sound in the walls and her own irregular heartbeat. These weren't the actions of a hopeless case. This was a dog with unique abilities that someone had misdiagnosed or deliberately mislabeled. As Driscoll's heels clicked away down the corridor, Greer felt the weight of what she'd just done settle over her. She'd defied direct orders, challenged established policy, and potentially put her job on the line. But as she looked at the puppy, who was now calmly watching her with those intelligent eyes, she knew she'd made the right choice. Don't worry, buddy, she whispered, crouching down again. We're going to figure out what's really going on with you. The puppy's tail wagged, and he pressed his nose against the chain-link fence, offering a small lick to her fingers. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside, Greer felt a strange sense of calm. She had chosen her path, chosen to honor her oath and her conscience over blind obedience to policy. Whatever consequences came, she would face them knowing she had done what was right. She began a thorough examination right there, making detailed notes about every response, every behavior that contradicted the hopeless label in his file. The more she observed, the more certain she became that there was much more to this three-legged puppy than anyone had bothered to discover. R13's reactions were precise, his attention focused. When her heart fluttered again, a reminder of her own ignored health issues, he immediately responded with that same concerned pawing motion. It was almost as if he had been trained for medical alert work, though how such a dog had ended up here, mislabeled and scheduled for euthanasia, was a mystery she intended to solve. The pre-dawn hours ticked by as Greer documented everything, building a case for this dog's second chance at life. Outside, the storm began to ease, but she knew another kind of storm was brewing inside the shelter, one that would test her resolve and force her to confront not just shelter politics, but her own long-held compromises with a system she'd never fully believed in. As the first hints of daylight began to peek through the windows, Greer looked at her extensive notes and then back at the puppy, who had remained alert and engaged throughout her examination. Well, Y13, she said softly. Looks like we're in this together now. The puppy's tail wagged, and for a moment Greer could have sworn he smiled. The early morning quiet of Mesa Vista County Shelter shattered as Marla Driscoll's heels clicked purposefully down the hallway. Her sharp footsteps echoed off the concrete walls, growing louder as she approached Dr. Greer Langley's position near Kennel Y13. The shelter director's face was set in hard lines, her manila folder clutched like a weapon. Dr. Langley? Marla's voice cut through the ambient sounds of the shelter. A word. It wasn't a request. Greer straightened up from where she'd been examining Y13, her notebook still in hand. The three-legged puppy pressed against the chain-link fence, watching the interaction with alert eyes. Section 47.6 of the County Liability Statutes. Marla began, flipping open her folder with practiced precision. Clearly states that any animal deemed non-functional or dangerous must be euthanized within the prescribed window. Your contract explicitly acknowledges these terms. Thunder rumbled outside, but the storm was beginning to fade into steady rain. Greer felt her heart skip. That familiar flutter she'd been ignoring for too long. As if on cue, Y13 let out a sharp bark, his paw reaching through the fence toward her chest. "The assessment window has closed," Marla continued, her voice growing harder. "I've already contacted Animal Control for compliance oversight. The euthanasia schedule has been accelerated to today." "Director Driscoll," Greer began, fighting to keep her voice steady. "This puppy is showing clear signs of specialized training. His responses are too precise to be random. We need time to." "What we need," Marla cut in, "is compliance with shelter policy. Your personal opinions don't override established protocols." Movement at the end of the hallway caught Greer's attention. Piper Sloane, one of the vet techs, had appeared with her morning charts. The younger woman hesitated, then moved closer, her face showing clear concern for the confrontation. "Dr. Langley's right," Piper spoke up, her voice quiet but firm. "I've been monitoring Y13 during my rounds. His behavior patterns suggest previous training. Look how he's tracking movements, responding to sounds." "Miss Sloane." Marla's tone could have frozen water. "Your input wasn't requested." But Piper stood her ground, adjusting her glasses with slightly trembling fingers. "As a certified vet tech, I'm qualified to report behavioral observations, and I'm noting them in the official record." She held up a tablet, showing the documentation she'd been keeping. The sound of the shelter's front door opening echoed through the building, followed by measured footsteps. Officer Reed Garland appeared around the corner, his animal control uniform neat despite the early hour and bad weather. His dark hair was slightly damp from the rain, and his expression was professionally neutral as he took in the scene. "Officer Garland." Marla's tone shifted to something more pleasant, though her eyes remained cold. "Thank you for coming so promptly. We have a situation requiring oversight." Reed nodded, his gaze moving between the assembled group and the puppy in the kennel. "I received your call about a compliance issue. What exactly am I observing here?" "Dr. Langley is refusing to follow through on a scheduled euthanasia for a non-functional animal," Marla stated. "I need you to witness and document any further non-compliance." Greer felt her heart flutter again, stronger this time. I-13 barked sharply, pawing at the fence with increased urgency. The puppy's eyes were fixed on her chest, his behavior so specific it couldn't be coincidence. "Officer," Greer said, pressing a hand to her sternum to calm her racing pulse. "I'm requesting a temporary hold for additional observation. This dog is displaying signs of medical alert training. Look." She gestured to Y13, who was still focused intently on her. "He's consistently responding to my cardiac arrhythmia. These aren't random movements." Reed stepped closer to the kennel, his expression thoughtful as he watched the puppy's behavior. I-13 turned to acknowledge him, but quickly returned his attention to Greer, barking again when her heart gave another uncomfortable skip. "Director Driscoll," Reed said carefully, "if there's reasonable cause for medical review." "There isn't," Marla snapped. "This animal was professionally evaluated and deemed non-functional. Dr. Langley is simply refusing to accept the assessment." She turned back to Greer, her voice dropping to a dangerous level. "This is your final warning. Process the euthanasia as scheduled, or there will be serious consequences for your contract." Greer was already pulling out her medical equipment, her hands steady despite the pressure. "I'm recording new vitals and behavior notes," she announced, meeting Marla's glare with determination. "As the shelter's attending veterinarian, I have the authority to place any animal under medical observation when warranted." "You're making a serious mistake," Marla warned, but Greer continued her examination, documenting every response, every alert, every sign that proved this dog was far more than his non-functional label suggested. Piper moved to assist, helping Greer gather the necessary supplies while Reed watched with professional attention. The vet tech's quiet support helped steady Greer's resolve as she worked. Blood pressure and heart rate are normal, Greer noted aloud, making sure Reed could hear her professional assessment. Pupillary response excellent, showing clear evidence of scent training and medical alert capabilities. She looked up at the animal control officer. These findings directly contradict the previous assessment. I'm implementing a temporary medical hold for further observation. This is ridiculous, Marla hissed. Officer Garland, I want it noted that Dr. Langley is in direct violation of shelter policy. I'm noting everything, Reed assured her, though his tone remained neutral. His eyes hadn't left the puppy, who was demonstrating remarkably focused behavior for an animal supposedly beyond help. The rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows as Greer completed her examination. With Piper's help, she carefully transferred Y13 to the clinic ward, where she could monitor him more closely. The puppy went willingly, his three-legged gait steady as he followed their lead. 24 hours, Marla declared as Greer secured the clinic kennel. That's all you're buying yourself, Doctor. And when this farce is over, we'll be discussing your future with this facility. She turned on her heel and strode away, leaving the threat hanging in the air. Reed lingered, watching as Greer settled Y13 into his temporary sanctuary. You're taking quite a risk, he observed quietly. I took an oath, Greer replied, checking the kennel's water supply, to prevent animal suffering and protect life where possible. Sometimes keeping that oath means standing your ground. The officer nodded thoughtfully. I'll need to file my initial report, but I'll be back to observe the additional testing. As Reed's footsteps faded down the hallway, Piper touched Greer's arm gently. You're doing the right thing, the vet tech said, and you're not alone in this. Greer managed a small smile, though her heart felt heavy with the weight of what was coming. She had bought Y13 some time, but she knew Marla wouldn't let this go easily. The choice was stark. Obey and betray everything she believed in, or stand firm and potentially lose everything she'd worked for. Looking at Y13, now settled calmly in his clinic kennel, Greer knew she'd already made her choice. Whatever consequences came, she would face them knowing she had honored her oath and her conscience. The puppy looked back at her with those intelligent eyes, and for a moment the sound of the rain seemed to fade away. In its place was a clarity Greer hadn't felt in years, the certainty that some fights were worth any cost. She pulled out her notebook again, determined to document every detail that might help save this remarkable dog. The next 24 hours would be crucial, and she intended to make every minute count. The early morning quiet of Mesa Vista County Shelter settled around Dr. Greer Langley as she sat at her cramped desk, the gentle whir of her ancient computer providing background noise. Through the clinic window, she could see 13 yen curled up on a soft blanket, his 3 legs tucked underneath him. The small dog's chest rose and fell steadily in sleep, occasionally twitching as he dreamed. Greer's fingers flew across the keyboard, diving deep into the shelter's database. Something about Y13's case didn't add up, and she was determined to find out what. The microchip scanner sat beside her, its small screen still displaying the results from her earlier scan. Silver Ridge K9 Services. Piper, she called softly to her vet tech, who was organizing supplies nearby. Can you pull up everything we have on Silver Ridge? Piper adjusted her sliding glasses and nodded, her blonde hair falling into her eyes. On it, Dr. Langley. While Piper worked, Greer opened another browser tab and began researching cerebellar hyperplasia, the condition listed in Y13's intake papers. Her green eyes narrowed as she read through medical journals and veterinary resources. This doesn't make sense, she muttered, leaning back in her chair. The symptoms described in the literature didn't match what she was seeing in Y13. While the pup did have an unsteady gait, his coordination wasn't nearly as impaired as it should be for a true case of cerebellar hypoplasia. More importantly, the condition wasn't painful or progressive. Many dogs lived full, happy lives with proper accommodations. Dr. Langley? Piper's voice pulled her from her thoughts. I found something interesting in the archived files. She wheeled her chair over, tablet in hand. Look at this. There are notes about scent discrimination drills and volatile compounds training. Greer leaned in closer, scanning the documents Piper had uncovered. Silver Ridge wasn't just a kennel. They were training detection dogs. Her heart began to race as pieces started falling into place. Pull up the intake records for the last 6 months. I want to see all cases marked as unadoptable. They worked in focused silence for the next hour, comparing documents side by side. Piper was the first to notice the pattern. Dr. Langley, these intake forms, the language is identical in several places, like someone copied and pasted the same text over and over. She pointed to several examples on her screen. See? The same phrases about behavioral issues and liability concerns. Greer felt her pulse quicken, and not from her arrhythmia this time. They're covering something up, she said quietly. Why 13 wasn't dumped because he's disabled. He was dumped because he was expensive. She stood up and walked to the observation window, watching the sleeping dog. As if sensing her attention, Y13 lifted his head and thumped his tail against the blanket. His eyes were clear and alert, showing none of the confusion typical of severe neurological conditions. He was trained to detect hazardous vapors, Greer explained to Piper. That's why he was so focused on the ticking in the wall earlier, and why he reacted to my arrhythmia. He's not broken. He's specialized. But why would they just abandon him? Piper asked, her face reflecting the same mixture of anger and confusion Greer felt. Training detection dogs is expensive, Greer replied, thinking it through. If he got injured during training, they probably decided it was cheaper to dump him than to finish his training or care for him properly. The thought made her stomach turn. Just then, Officer Reed Garland appeared in the doorway, his broad shoulders filling the frame. How's our patient doing? He asked, his dark eyes taking in the scattered papers and computer screens. Greer straightened up, suddenly aware of how this might look to someone tasked with enforcing shelter policy. But something in Reed's expression gave her hope. There was curiosity there, not suspicion. Officer Garland, she said carefully, I need your opinion on something. She gestured him over to the observation window. Watch him for a minute. Tell me what you see. Reed moved closer, his presence steady and calm. 13 immediately perked up, nose working the air. He's very alert, Reed noted. Good focus. Tracking movements. Exactly. Greer agreed. Not what you'd expect from a dog with severe neurological issues, is it? She explained what they'd discovered. The training facility connection, the suspicious intake papers, the evidence suggesting Y13 was actually a partially trained detection dog. Reed listened carefully, his expression growing more serious with each detail. This is a serious accusation, Dr. Langley, he said finally. Going against chain of command could have consequences. I know, Greer acknowledged, but I can't ignore this. Look at him. He has value, real potential. He just needs a chance to prove it. Reed watched Y13 for another long moment, then turned to face her. What's your plan? I want to keep him under observation for 24 hours, Greer explained. It's within my medical authority to order that. It will give us time to explore legal options for transfer or rehabilitation placement. Reed rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. The dog does show unusual scent focus, he admitted. I noticed it myself earlier, the way he tracks movement and air currents. Not typical shelter dog behavior. So you'll support the observation period? Greer asked, trying to keep the hope out of her voice. I'll note in my report that the dog demonstrates specialized behavioral patterns warranting further assessment, Reed said carefully. That's not going against policy, it's just recording what I've observed. Greer felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. It wasn't a full victory, but it was something. Thank you, she said quietly. "Don't thank me yet," Reed cautioned. "Marla won't like this delay." "I know," Greer acknowledged. "But maybe if we can prove Y-13's potential value, she'll have to reconsider." Piper, who had been quietly working nearby, spoke up. "I've started documenting everything. The training facility records, the suspicious intake patterns, Y-13's actual behavior versus what's claimed in his file. If we need to make a case, we'll have evidence." Reed nodded approvingly. "Smart. Keep everything properly logged and dated." He checked his watch. "I need to make my rounds, but I'll check back later." "Be careful, Dr. Langley. Do this by the book." After Reed left, Greer returned to her desk and began writing up her official observation order. Her hands shook slightly as she typed, but her resolve was firm. I-13 had already proven he was special. Now they just needed time to prove it to everyone else. "Piper," she called, "let's set up some basic scent tests. Nothing fancy, just enough to document his capabilities, and keep tracking those intake records. I want to know how many other dogs might have been misclassified." "On it," Piper replied, already pulling supplies from the cabinets. Through the window, Y-13 watched them with bright, intelligent eyes. He'd stopped trembling entirely, as if he knew they were finally seeing him for what he really was. Not a broken, unwanted animal, but a trained professional who'd been betrayed by the very people who should have protected him. Greer met his steady gaze and made him a silent promise. She would find a way to save him, to give him the chance he deserved. It wouldn't be easy. Marla would fight them every step of the way. But she wouldn't back down. Not when she knew the truth that would reframe everything about Y-13's case. He wasn't disabled, he was gifted. He wasn't dangerous, he was valuable. And most importantly, he wasn't unadoptable. He was exactly where he needed to be, with people who would fight to give him a future. The morning sun finally broke through the clouds, sending rays of light streaming through the clinic windows. 13 moved into the warm patch, his three-legged gait steady and purposeful. As he settled into the sunlight, Greer could almost see the labels and limitations falling away from him, revealing the extraordinary dog he truly was. She turned back to her computer, fingers flying across the keyboard as she documented everything. They had 24 hours to build their case. 24 hours to prove that sometimes what looks like a disability is actually a gift in disguise. 24 hours to save one very special dog who had already saved himself by refusing to be anything less than what he was born to be. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Greer, Piper, and Reed gathered in the small clinic office. Morning sunlight struggled to penetrate the rain-streaked windows, casting weak shadows across their determined faces. Y-13 sat alertly between them, his three-legged stance steady and purposeful. "We need to do this exactly by the book," Reed emphasized, his uniform crisp despite the early hour. "One misstep and Marla will shut us down completely." Greer nodded, pulling out the shelter's procedure manual. "I can file for a 24-hour medical hold. It's within my authority as staff veterinarian, especially given his unusual behavioral patterns." "I'll help document everything," Piper offered, pushing her glasses up her nose. "Every observation, every test result, we'll build a bulletproof case." Reed crossed his arms, considering. "All right. But remember, I have to report everything I see. I can't look the other way if policies are violated." "We don't need you to," Greer assured him. "We just need you to be fair and thorough in your observations. Y-13 will do the rest." As if understanding his name, the dog's ears perked up. His alert gaze moved between them, somehow seeming to grasp the gravity of their impromptu meeting. Greer pulled out the official hold request form and began filling it out in her neat handwriting. "I'm citing his demonstrated scent detection abilities and possible prior training as grounds for re-evaluation. We'll need to document specific examples." "I can set up some basic scent tests," Piper suggested. "Nothing fancy, just enough to show his capabilities, and I'll start backing up all his intake records and medical history." "Good thinking," Reed said. "If there's any funny business with his paperwork, we need proof of the original documents." They worked quickly but carefully, each focusing on their designated tasks. Greer documented Y13's current vital signs and behavior patterns, noting his steady gait and focused attention. Despite his supposed tremors, the dog moved with surprising grace and purpose. Piper sat at the computer, fingers flying across the keyboard as she accessed the shelter's digital records. "I'm creating secure copies of everything related to Y13," she murmured, "plus similar cases from the past 6 months, just in case any files mysteriously vanish." Reed positioned himself near the door, maintaining a professional demeanor while keeping watch. "Marla's in her office," he reported quietly, "but she's been checking the security cameras more than usual." The morning crept forward as they worked, tension growing with each passing hour. They could all feel the weight of time pressing down on them. 24 hours wasn't much, but it might be enough if they used every minute wisely. Around mid-morning, the sharp click of heels in the hallway announced Marla's approach. Reed straightened, adjusting his badge, while Greer calmly continued her examination notes. Piper minimized her screen just as Marla appeared in the doorway. "Progress report?" Marla demanded, her severe bob haircut framing a face carved from ice. "Full medical re-evaluation in process," Greer replied evenly, gesturing to her detailed notes. "Given Y13's unique presentation, I'm following standard protocols for specialized cases." Marla's eyes narrowed. "Officer Garland, why hasn't the scheduled procedure been completed?" "Dr. Langley is conducting a thorough medical assessment, as is her right under shelter policies," Reed answered professionally. "I'm observing to ensure all protocols are followed correctly." "This is unnecessary delay," Marla snapped. "That animal has already been evaluated and classified." "With respect, Director," Greer interjected, "new evidence suggests the initial classification may have been incomplete. I'm simply doing my due diligence as a medical professional." Marla's lips pressed into a thin line. "You have until end of day, Dr. Langley. Not 1 minute more." She turned on her heel and stalked away, leaving a wake of tension behind her. "She's rattled," Piper whispered once Marla was gone. "I've never seen her this worked up over one dog before." "Keep documenting everything," Reed advised, "and stay within the lines. She's looking for any excuse to shut this down." They settled into a careful rhythm as the day progressed. Greer conducted and recorded a series of basic tests demonstrating Y13's remarkable scent discrimination abilities. The dog consistently identified hidden objects based on smell alone, working with a focus that belied his non-functional label. Piper continued her careful data preservation, building a digital fortress of evidence. Every few minutes, another progress bar would creep across her screen as files were secured. She worked methodically, ensuring nothing could be lost or altered. Throughout the day, Marla made regular appearances, each time applying more pressure. She cited liability concerns, budget constraints, and facility policies. But Greer stood firm, calmly pointing to regulatory standards that supported their actions. "The hold request is almost ready," Greer announced as afternoon faded toward evening. She'd spent hours carefully crafting the document, ensuring every detail was properly supported and cited. "The backup's about 75% complete," Piper reported, glancing at her screen where yet another progress bar inched forward. Reed checked his watch. "Marla's doing final rounds now. Once she leaves for the day, we'll have a little breathing room." Y13 had been amazing throughout the long day, demonstrating incredible focus during the tests and maintaining perfect calm despite the tension. Now he lay at Greer's feet, finally allowing himself to rest, but still positioned protectively near her. The office grew dim as day faded to dusk. Piper's computer screen cast a blue glow over her tired face as she monitored the final file transfers. Greer put the finishing touches on the hold request, double-checking every detail before hitting send. "It's done," she said quietly, the simple words carrying enormous weight. They had bought 13 yen 24 more hours of life and created a foundation for saving him permanently. More importantly, they had come together as a team, each risking something to do what was right. 13 sighed in his sleep, his breath soft and steady. On Piper's screen, another progress bar crept steadily forward, preserving the truth one file at a time. They had taken their stand, quietly, legally, and together. Now they just had to hope it would be enough. The gentle whir of Piper's computer and Y-13's peaceful breathing filled the dim office as night settled over the shelter. Their first coordinated effort to save him was complete. Whatever came next, they would face it as a team. Reed moved to leave for his evening rounds, pausing at the door. "Good work today, both of you," he said softly. "Get some rest. Tomorrow won't be easy." Greer nodded, unconsciously resting her hand on Y-13's sleeping form. They had done everything by the book, created their evidence trail, and set their plan in motion. Now they just had to hold their ground and hope that 24 hours would be enough time to save one very special dog who had somehow brought them all together. Dawn crept over Mesa Vista County Shelter, painting the sky in shades of dusty rose and gold. The peaceful morning belied the tension brewing within the clinic ward, where Dr. Greer Langley stood reviewing Y-13's overnight charts. The three-legged pup had remained alert and responsive throughout his observation period, further confirming her suspicions about his true capabilities. The quiet was shattered by the sharp click of heels on linoleum. Marla Driscoll stormed into the ward, her face tight with barely contained fury. Behind her, 2 unfamiliar men in white coats followed, carrying equipment cases. "This ends now," Marla announced, her voice cutting through the morning stillness. "I've arranged for immediate off-premises euthanasia to avoid any further paperwork obstructions." She gestured sharply to the men. "These gentlemen will handle everything." Greer stepped protectively in front of Y-13's kennel. "You can't do this." "We have a legal hold request pending." "I can and I will," Marla snapped. Without warning, she strode to the wall panel and slammed down every circuit breaker, plunging the ward into sudden darkness. The abrupt blackness was disorienting. Emergency lights struggled to flicker on, casting weak red shadows across the confused faces of staff and animals. Y-13, who had been calmly observing from his kennel, suddenly went rigid. His entire demeanor changed in an instant. The pup's head snapped toward the water heater closet, and he began barking in a sharp, distinctive pattern. 3 quick barks, pause, 3 more. It wasn't the frantic barking of a frightened dog, but something precise and purposeful. Greer felt her heart skip. She recognized a trained alert pattern. As she turned toward the closet, a sickly sweet metallic smell hit her nostrils. Gas. "Everyone out!" she commanded, already moving toward the closet door. The smell grew stronger as she approached, making her head swim. Her fingers found the handle in the dim light, and she yanked it open. Y-13 lunged forward, straining toward the source of the leak, his barking becoming more urgent. In the weak emergency lighting, Greer could make out the shape of the water heater and the distinctive yellow gas line running to it. The metallic odor was overwhelming now. Following Y-13's alerts, he would bark more intensely when she moved in the right direction. Greer traced the line to where it connected to the wall. There she found what she was looking for, a crude timer device attached to the gas line, set to trigger a spark. "Reed!" she called out, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I need help in here." Officer Garland appeared at her shoulder, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "What have we got?" "Gas leak, deliberately set," Greer explained quickly. "Help me find the main shutoff valve." Together, they located the valve while Y-13 continued his warning barks, providing acoustic guidance in the dark space. Greer's hands shook slightly as she gripped the valve, but she managed to turn it firmly, cutting off the gas flow. "We need to vent this room immediately," Reed said, already moving to the windows. He forced them open while Greer used a spare lab coat to fan fresh air into the space. The shelter's emergency systems finally caught up to the crisis, and alarms began blaring throughout the building. Reed took charge of evacuation, his voice carrying clearly above the chaos. "Everyone clear the corridor! Move in an orderly fashion toward the exits." Staff and visitors began filing out while Piper worked furiously at the backup power controls. "Almost got it," she called out, fingers flying over the keyboard. "Emergency protocols are engaging." With a low hum, auxiliary power kicked in. Lights flickered back to life, revealing the scene in stark fluorescent clarity. The water heater closet stood open, its deadly secret exposed. Y-13 had finally stopped barking and sat alertly by Greer's side, his entire bearing that of a professional who had just completed his job. "This is proof," Greer said, her voice strengthening with certainty. "Undeniable proof. U-13 isn't just functional, he's exceptional. He just saved this entire building and everyone in it." The pup looked up at her with clear, intelligent eyes, his tail wagging slightly. There was no sign of the non-functional animal Marla had condemned to death. Instead, here was a highly trained working dog who had just demonstrated his life-saving capabilities in the most dramatic way possible. Piper emerged from the control room, tablet in hand. "I got everything on the security cameras," she announced. "From the moment Marla cut the power to Y-13's alert and the evacuation. It's all documented." Reed knelt to examine the timer device, careful not to touch it. "This is evidence now," he said grimly. "I'm calling in the fire marshal and police." Attempted arson is a serious felony. Through it all, Marla had stood frozen near the entrance, her face a mask of shock and growing fear as her plans unraveled before her eyes. The two men she'd brought in had disappeared during the chaos, leaving her alone to face the consequences of her actions. Greer turned to face her former supervisor, steel in her voice. "Still want to classify him as non-functional? Or should we discuss why you were so desperate to eliminate a dog trained to detect gas leaks?" The revelation hung in the air like a physical presence. 13 had not only proved his worth, but had exposed something much darker lurking beneath the shelter's surface. His actions had transformed him from a condemned animal to a hero, and in doing so, had given Greer the leverage she needed to save not just his life, but perhaps many others. The morning sun now streamed through the open windows, fresh air clearing away the last traces of gas. In its light, Y-13 sat tall despite his missing leg, every inch the professional detection dog he had been trained to be. He had faced his moment of truth and proved beyond any doubt that he was far from broken. He was extraordinary. The early morning light filtered through the clinic windows as Piper hunched over the computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard. The gas leak incident had shaken everyone, but it had also bought them precious time. Y-13 dozed near Greer's feet, his three-legged frame rising and falling with steady breaths. "Almost done with the file transfers," Piper mumbled, pushing her glasses back up her nose. Her eyes were red-rimmed from staring at the screen for hours. "But there's something weird here, Dr. Langley. Really weird." Greer moved closer to the monitor, careful not to disturb Y-13. "What kind of weird?" "These euthanasia forms." Piper clicked through several documents, her frown deepening. "Look at these signatures. They're practically identical, like someone copied and pasted them." Officer Reed Garland, who had stayed behind after the gas leak incident, stepped closer. His uniform was wrinkled from the long night, but his eyes were sharp and alert. "Show me," he said quietly. Piper pulled up two forms side by side. "See these owner signatures? The loops in the Ys, the way the Ts are crossed, they're exactly the same. And look at the dates. These are supposedly from different people, months apart." Greer's stomach churned as she studied the forms. "Pull up more." File after file revealed the same pattern. Owner-requested euthanasia forms with suspiciously similar signatures, but it was when Piper opened the financial records that the full picture emerged. "Each euthanasia has a disposal stipend attached," Piper explained, her voice trembling slightly. "The more animals put down, the more money allocated for disposal services. But look at these numbers. They don't match the actual disposal company's invoices." Reed leaned in closer, his jaw tightening. The difference is being pocketed. It's not just about moving animals through quickly, Greer said, her voice hollow. It's about profit. The more they euthanize, the more money they can skim off the top. I-13 stirred at her feet, whining softly. Greer reached down to scratch behind his ears, her heart heavy with the realization that his non-functional label had nothing to do with his actual condition. He was just another number in Marla's twisted accounting. This goes way beyond one dog, Reed said, running a hand through his graying hair. This is systematic fraud. Piper pulled up another set of documents. The language is copied and pasted too, same phrases about humanitarian euthanasia and owner-requested services across dozens of cases. They didn't even bother changing the wording. Greer felt sick. All those animals, all those lives reduced to entries in a kickback scheme. Her initial anger at Y-13's situation had been personal, a violation of her veterinary oath. But this was bigger. This was calculated cruelty for profit. We need to be careful with this evidence, Reed warned, his professional instincts kicking in. Chain of custody is crucial. One mistake in handling these files could compromise any future investigation. I'm creating verified copies, Piper assured him. Everything's time-stamped and backed up. I used to work in IT. I know how to preserve digital evidence. Greer paced the small office, her mind racing. This explains Marla's push for immediate euthanasia. Every delay, every animal we save, threatens her scheme. And why she was so desperate to stop us from looking too closely at any individual case. Reed added. One pulled thread could unravel the whole thing. Me-13 stood up, pressing against Greer's leg. She looked down at him, seeing him with new eyes. He wasn't just a disabled dog she'd saved on instinct. He was proof of how far Marla would go to maintain her profitable operation, even discarding a highly trained service animal because his paperwork could be manipulated for financial gain. The gas leak, Greer said suddenly. You don't think... Reed's expression darkened. Let's not jump to conclusions. But we should be extra careful from here on out. This kind of money can make people dangerous. Piper finished another set of backups, her hands shaking slightly. What do we do now? We document everything, Reed said firmly. Every form, every signature, every financial discrepancy. But we have to do this by the book. No shortcuts, no assumptions. Evidence this serious needs to be handled properly. Greer nodded, her initial disgust hardening into determination. I-13 was never the real problem. He was just another line item in Marla's ledger. But now he's become something else. Proof that her whole system is built on lies. We'll need help, Reed said. This is too big for us to handle internally, but we have to be smart about who we trust. First priority is keeping these records safe, Piper said, ejecting a thumb drive and sealing it in an evidence bag Reed provided. And keeping ourselves safe too. Greer looked around at her small team, Piper with her technical skills and quiet courage, Reed with his professional integrity wrestling against his duty to follow protocol, and Y-13, whose very existence challenged Marla's corrupt system. The stakes had shifted dramatically. This wasn't just about saving one dog anymore, it was about exposing a system that traded lives for profit. We do this right, Greer said firmly, no matter how long it takes. These animals deserved better than to be turned into dollar signs. Reed nodded gravely. I'll make some discreet inquiries about proper channels for reporting financial fraud in county facilities. We need to build this case carefully. Piper secured the last of the files and shut down the computer. All copied and verified, multiple backups in different locations. She can't delete her way out of this now. I-13 let out a soft bark, as if adding his own agreement to the plan. Greer smiled down at him, remembering how close he'd come to being just another falsified form in Marla's scheme. Instead, he'd become the key to exposing something far darker than they'd initially imagined. The morning sun was fully up now, casting long shadows through the clinic windows. Somewhere in the shelter, they could hear Marla's heels clicking on the concrete floors as she made her rounds. But the sound didn't carry the same intimidating weight it had before. Now they knew what she was really protecting. Not shelter policy, but a carefully constructed scheme of death and profit. We should get back to our regular routines, Reed suggested quietly. Don't give her any reason to suspect we know. Greer agreed. They had to play this smart. Y-13's life still hung in the balance, but now they were fighting for something bigger, justice for countless animals who had been reduced to entries in a corrupt ledger. As they dispersed to their normal positions, Greer felt the weight of their discovery settling on her shoulders. But mixed with that weight was a steely resolve. Marla's house of cards was about to come down, one carefully documented piece of evidence at a time. Y-13 pressed against her leg once more, his alert eyes fixed on her face. She reached down to scratch his ears, whispering, "We'll make it right, boy. For all of them." The morning shift was beginning, bringing with it the usual sounds of the shelter coming to life. But underneath the routine, something had fundamentally changed. The truth was out there now, preserved in multiple copies and backed up by irrefutable evidence. Their fight to save one dog had unveiled a much bigger battle, one that would shake the shelter to its foundations. The storm outside had settled into a steady drizzle against the shelter windows as Dr. Greer Langley, Officer Reed Garland, and Piper Sloan gathered in the small clinic office to plan their next moves. The three-legged pup Y-13, who had just proven his worth by detecting a potentially deadly gas leak, sat attentively between them, his bright eyes moving from face to face as if following the conversation. "First things first," Reed said, his voice low and determined. "We need to secure the dog legally." He pulled out an official-looking form from his patrol jacket. "I'm taking Y-13 into protective custody. This prevents any accidental transfers or other mishaps while we build our case." Greer felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "That's perfect. Marla can't touch him if he's in official custody." She knelt down to scratch behind Y-13's ears, and the pup leaned into her touch, his tail wagging gently. "I'll write up the custody paperwork right now," Reed continued, settling at the small desk. "We'll cite potential evidence in an ongoing investigation, plus his demonstrated ability to detect hazardous conditions." His pen moved steadily across the form as he spoke. Piper, who had been quiet until now, spoke up from her position at the computer. "I've got all the intake records copied and secured. But there's something else we should check." She glanced toward the door. "Marla's office. She has a safe behind her desk calendar. I've seen her access it when she thought no one was watching." Reed looked up from his paperwork. "That would require probable cause and proper procedure." "The gas leak gives us that," Greer pointed out. "We need to check for any documentation related to facility safety and maintenance. It's within protocol, especially after a near-miss incident." Reed considered this, then nodded slowly. "I'll accompany you. We do this by the book." They moved carefully through the quiet shelter corridors, Y-13 padding along beside them. The director's office was dark and empty. Marla had left hours ago after the gas leak disruption. Reed used his authority to enter, documenting each step with his body camera running. Piper went straight to the calendar, carefully moving it aside to reveal the small wall safe. "It's a basic 4-digit combination lock," she said. "I've seen her enter it, 1984. The safe clicked open on the first try. Inside, among various papers and files, they found a thumb drive labeled Payment Records 2023. "Jackpot," Piper whispered, carefully removing it with gloved hands while Reed photographed everything. Back in the clinic office, they began assembling their evidence. Greer focused on drafting a comprehensive report for the county board, her medical training helping her organize the information clearly and concisely. She detailed Y-13's initial diagnosis of cerebellar hypoplasia, including video footage of his movements that clearly showed his condition was manageable, not debilitating. "See here," she explained to Reed and Piper, pointing to her laptop screen. "His gait isn't random tremors, it's a consistent, adapted movement pattern. He's learned to compensate for his condition brilliantly, and his scent detection abilities are completely unaffected. She included the security footage of the gas leak incident, showing Y-13's precise alerts and the immediate danger he had helped them avoid. This proves he's not just functional, he's exceptionally capable. Meanwhile, Piper worked on accessing the thumb drive's contents. Her eyes widened as she scrolled through file after file. "These are payment logs, and look at these signatures!" She turned her screen so the others could see. The same owner-requested euthanasia signature, repeated dozens of times with slight variations. They're all forged. Reed leaned in, his law enforcement experience lending additional weight to his assessment. This is systematic fraud. The disposal stipends are being inflated, and the paperwork's being falsified to justify higher numbers. They worked through the night, organizing their findings into a clear, compelling presentation. Greer focused on the medical evidence, creating a timeline that showed how animals were being deliberately misclassified as unadoptable to feed the scheme. Reed carefully documented the chain of custody for every piece of evidence, ensuring nothing could be dismissed on procedural grounds. Piper took charge of the technical aspects, creating multiple secure backups of all their digital evidence. "I'm setting up mirrored copies on encrypted drives," she explained. "Even if something happens to one set, we'll have others." As dawn approached, Greer made the call to schedule their hearing with the county board. Her heart was pounding, not from her arrhythmia this time, but from nervous excitement, as she secured a slot for the following afternoon. "We need to rehearse," she said, spreading their evidence packets across the desk. "The sequence matters. We start with the medical proof, showing how the diagnoses were manipulated. Then the operational footage demonstrating Y-13's abilities, which proves the diagnoses were intentionally wrong. Finally, we present the financial trail that shows why they did it." Reed nodded approvingly. "That builds the case logically, and everything's documented properly. They can't dismiss this as hearsay or procedural errors." I-13 had settled into a corner of the office, dozing but still alert to any unusual sounds. His presence reminded them of what they were fighting for, not just justice for one dog, but for all the animals who had been caught in this scheme. The night hours ticked by as they refined their presentation. Greer practiced explaining the medical terminology in clear, accessible language. Reed prepared to testify about the gas leak incident and his observations of Y-13's capabilities. Piper organized the financial documents to show the clear pattern of fraud. For the first time since this had all begun, victory felt within reach. Their evidence was solid, their documentation meticulous, and their strategy sound. I-13 was safely in protective custody, and their case was ready for the board. "We should try to get some rest," Reed finally suggested, as the first hints of dawn began to show through the windows. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." Greer looked at their assembled evidence. Multiple copies secured in separate locations, every detail checked and double-checked. They had done everything by the book, built an airtight case, and protected Y-13. Now they just had to hold their ground through the night and present their findings to the board. "We've got this," Piper said softly, her quiet confidence bolstering their spirits. "They can't ignore this evidence. Not when it's this clear." I-13 lifted his head and gave a soft woof, as if adding his own vote of confidence to their efforts. Greer smiled, reaching down to ruffle his ears. Against all odds, they had assembled everything they needed to expose the truth. Now they just had to wait for morning and their chance to present it to the board. The rain had stopped outside, and a gentle quiet settled over the shelter. Their evidence was ready, their strategy set, and Y-13 was safe. For the first time since this had all begun, hope felt like more than just a distant possibility. It felt real and tangible, as solid as the documentation they had assembled and as certain as Y-13's unwavering gaze. The late hours at Mesa Vista County Shelter stretched long and quiet. Too quiet. Greer sat at her desk, organizing the last of their evidence files, while Piper worked nearby, creating digital backups. Reed had stepped out to do a final security check of the building, with Y-13 padding faithfully at his heels. The silence shattered when Y-13's urgent barking echoed down the corridor. Not his usual alert bark. This was different, more frantic. Greer's head snapped up, her heart skipping an uneven beat. "Something's wrong," she said, rising from her chair. A thin tendril of smoke began creeping under the records room door, barely visible in the dim light. The acrid smell hit her nose seconds later. Greer's blood ran cold. "Fire!" she whispered, then louder. "Fire! Piper, call 911. Piper grabbed her phone with shaking hands, punching in the emergency number while Greer rushed to the door. The smoke was thickening rapidly, carrying an chemical odor that spoke of accelerants. This was no accident. "Records room," Reed's voice called out, strained with urgency. "I'm checking." A thunderous crash cut him off, followed by his sharp cry of pain. Through the growing haze, Greer saw a massive metal shelving unit had toppled, pinning Reed's leg beneath its weight. The sprinkler system sputtered to life. But something was wrong. Instead of a steady spray, the water came in irregular bursts, insufficient to combat the flames, now visibly licking at stacks of paper files. "Dispatch says fire crews are 8 minutes out," Piper reported, already moving toward the kennel area. "I'm evacuating the animals." "Go!" Greer ordered, her mind racing through emergency protocols even as her heart hammered against her ribs. The toxic smoke was filling the corridor rapidly, making it harder to see or breathe. Y-13 darted back and forth, his three-legged gait surprisingly steady as he tugged at Greer's pant leg, trying to guide her toward pockets of clearer air near the floor. The dog's specialized training was kicking in. He could detect where the air was safest. The building groaned ominously overhead. Ceiling tiles, sodden from the faltering sprinklers, began to sag and fall. The heat was intensifying by the second, and Reed remained trapped, his face contorted in pain as he tried unsuccessfully to free himself. Greer knew they had minutes, maybe less. She grabbed a leash from a nearby hook and quickly tied it to her belt, creating a safety line. Following Y-13's lead, she dropped to her hands and knees where the air was clearest. "Hold on, Reed!" she called out, beginning to crawl toward him. The floor was slick with water and ash, making progress treacherous. The smoke burned her eyes and throat, but she pressed forward, using Y-13's guidance to find the safest path. Through the chaos, she could hear Piper's voice in the distance, coordinating with other shelter staff to evacuate the animals. The younger woman's usually quiet demeanor had given way to clear, commanding tones as she directed the emergency response. Another ceiling tile crashed down nearby, sending up a shower of sparks. The flames were spreading faster now, feeding on decades of paper records. The bitter irony wasn't lost on Greer. Their evidence, meant to expose Marla's corruption, was literally going up in smoke. What had started as a simple plan to present their findings to the board had become a desperate fight for survival. The heat pressed down like a physical weight as Greer inched closer to Reed. Sweat ran down her face, mixing with tears from the caustic smoke. 13 stayed close, his low whines guiding her whenever the smoke became too thick to see through. "Almost there," she gasped, reaching for Reed's outstretched hand. The shelving unit that trapped him was massive, its metal frame now dangerously hot from the surrounding flames. Reed's face was pale with pain and fear, but his eyes remained focused. "The evidence," he coughed out. "All our proof." "Lives first." Greer cut him off, examining the shelving unit. She knew they couldn't lift it, not with Reed injured and the fire consuming the oxygen they needed for strength. They would have to be smarter. I-13 barked sharply, drawing their attention to a fallen length of pipe that had broken free from the ceiling. Greer's mind raced. It could work as a lever. "Hold on," she told Reed, crawling quickly to retrieve the pipe. The metal was hot against her palms as she wedged it under the shelving unit. "When I lift, pull yourself free." "Ready?" Reed nodded, bracing himself. Greer took a deep breath of the increasingly toxic air and pushed down on the pipe with all her strength. The shelving unit shifted just enough, and Reed dragged himself clear with a cry of pain. The building let out another threatening groan. Chunks of ceiling were falling more frequently now, and the flames had spread to create a terrifying barrier between them and the main exit. 13 barked again, more urgently, tugging them toward a different route. The dog's training was proving invaluable. He could sense which paths still had breathable air and structural stability. "Trust him," Greer gasped, helping Reed to his hands and knees. "He knows the way." Together, they began the agonizing crawl to safety, following Y-13's lead through the smoke-filled corridor. Reed's injured leg left a smeared trail of blood on the wet floor, but he pressed on without complaint. The heat was becoming unbearable. Greer's lungs burned with every breath, and her vision swam with tears and exhaustion. But Y-13 remained steady, guiding them around dangerous hotspots and falling debris. Through the roar of the flames, they could hear sirens approaching. Help was coming, but the question was whether it would arrive in time. The building's structural integrity was failing rapidly, and the smoke was getting thicker by the second. Mi-13 suddenly stopped, letting out a series of sharp barks. Through the haze, Greer could make out a faint rectangle of less dense smoke, an emergency exit. Hope surged through her tired body, giving her a fresh burst of energy. The door felt miles away, though it couldn't have been more than 30 feet. Each movement was agony, the smoke now so thick it felt like trying to breathe underwater. Reed's breathing had become ragged, and Greer could feel her own heart stuttering dangerously in her chest. The building gave one final thunderous groan. Greer looked up to see the ceiling beginning to cave in, a wave of destruction rolling toward them. What had started as Marla's desperate attempt to destroy evidence had become a race against total structural collapse. The acrid smoke burned Greer's eyes as she tied Y-13's leash to her belt with trembling fingers. The small three-legged pup pressed close against her leg, his nose working frantically as he tested the air. Through the thickening haze, she could make out Reed's form pinned beneath the fallen shelving unit, his face tight with pain. "Stay low," Reed called out, his voice strained. "The smoke's getting worse." Y-13 barked sharply and tugged at the leash, pulling Greer toward the floor. She dropped to her hands and knees, understanding immediately. The air was clearer at ground level, where the pup's keen nose had already detected a path forward. "Good boy," she whispered hoarsely. "Show us the way." The dog inched forward, sniffing carefully before each movement. Greer crawled behind him, feeling the rough carpet beneath her palms. The heat pressed down from above like a physical weight, and somewhere in the building, the fire alarm's shrill cry pierced through the crackle of flames. Y-13 stopped suddenly, letting out a high-pitched yelp as he encountered a pocket of thin air. His training kicked in. He backtracked quickly, nudging Greer to shift left where the oxygen was better. She could feel the difference in her burning lungs as soon as they changed course. "We're coming, Reed," she called out. "Just hold on." The distance to Reed seemed endless as they inched forward through the smoky corridor. 13 maintained his focus, constantly testing the air quality, leading them through the safest path possible. When they finally reached Reed, Greer's heart clenched at his trapped position. The metal shelving unit had him pinned awkwardly, its weight pressing against his right leg. Greer quickly scanned the area, spotting a pry bar that had fallen from the maintenance cart nearby. She stretched out, fingers straining until they closed around the cool metal. "This is going to hurt," she warned Reed, positioning the pry bar beneath the shelving unit. "But we have to move fast." Reed nodded grimly, his face sheened with sweat. "Do it." Greer threw her weight against the pry bar, muscles screaming with the effort. The shelving unit shifted slightly, and Reed bit back a cry of pain as he worked to pull his leg free. Above them, the ceiling tiles began to glow ominously orange. Y-13 barked urgently, 3 sharp barks that echoed his earlier gas leak warning. Greer didn't need his special training to know what that meant. Time was running out. "One more try," she gasped, repositioning the pry bar. "Push with your other leg when I lift." The combined effort finally worked. The shelving unit moved just enough for Reed to slide his leg out. He couldn't completely suppress a groan of pain as he moved, but there was no time to be gentle. The ceiling was starting to spark and pop with frightening intensity. Euthanize was already tugging at the leash, showing them the way back. Reed stumbled to his hands and knees, and Greer helped steady him as they began their retreat. The dog led them through the maze of smoke, choosing paths where the air was still breathable. The heat grew more intense with each passing second. Sweat ran down their faces, and breathing became increasingly difficult. Euthanize worked tirelessly, testing each foot of space before allowing them to move forward, ensuring they stayed in the precious pockets of clearer air near the floor. They were perhaps 20 feet from the exit when Greer heard it, the distinctive whoosh of fire finding new fuel. The ceiling was fully involved now, and the flames were spreading with frightening speed. "Move!" she screamed loud, pushing Reed forward as Y-13 lunged for the door. They abandoned their careful crawl for a desperate scramble, racing against the wave of heat building behind them. They burst through the door into the relative clarity of the hallway, just as a massive fireball roared through the ward they'd just left. The blast of superheated air knocked them forward, and they sprawled onto the floor as emergency responders rushed toward them with protective gear and oxygen masks. The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Paramedics whisked them to waiting ambulances while firefighters battled the blaze. Greer refused to let go of Y-13's leash, and the medical team worked around the loyal dog as they checked her vitals and administered oxygen. In the adjacent ambulance, Reed received more intensive care for his injuries. The initial assessment revealed a fractured rib, along with the leg injury from the shelving unit, but he was alive. They all were, thanks to Y-13's remarkable abilities. Piper found them at the hospital emergency department, her face streaked with tears of relief. In her hands, she clutched both the thumb drive and a laptop containing the mirrored copies of all their evidence. "Everything's safe," she assured them, her voice shaking. "I got all the backups out before the fire reached the main office. And the fire investigators, they're already finding proof of accelerants. Marla didn't cover her tracks well enough this time." Reed managed a weak smile from his hospital bed. She was desperate. Makes sense. She knew we had her cornered with the financial records. Greer sat in a chair between their beds, oxygen mask temporarily removed so she could speak. 13 lay at her feet, refusing to leave his position as guardian even here in the safety of the hospital. "You know what this means?" she asked, looking between her two friends. "We didn't just survive, we won. The evidence chain is intact. We have multiple witnesses to the arson attempt, and most importantly," she reached down to scratch Y-13's ears, "we have living proof that this amazing dog is anything but non-functional." The fire investigators' preliminary report arrived while they were still being treated. It confirmed what they already knew. Accelerant traces were found in multiple locations, and the pattern of the fire's spread clearly indicated deliberate origin points. Security cameras had captured Marla's presence in the building shortly before the fire started, and her hasty departure immediately after. The medical staff insisted on keeping Reed overnight for observation and to begin treatment for his fractured rib. His leg, while badly bruised, had somehow escaped serious injury. Both he and Greer were treated for smoke inhalation, but the damage could have been far worse if not for Y-13's guidance through the clearer air pockets. As evening settled over the hospital room, Piper set up her laptop and showed them the preserved evidence, payment logs, falsified documents, forged signatures, and now the fire investigation findings that proved Marla's desperate attempt to destroy it all. The thumb drive and its copies had survived, and with them, the entire truth of the shelter's corrupt operations. "You know what still amazes me?" Reed said, shifting carefully in his bed to find a more comfortable position. "Howie 13 knew exactly where to lead us. Even with all that smoke and heat, he never lost his way." Greer smiled down at the dog, who had finally allowed himself to doze off, though his ears still twitched at every new sound. "He was never broken," she said softly. "He just needed someone to see his true worth. And now, thanks to him, everyone else will see it too." The next days would bring official investigations, board hearings, and public accountability for Marla's actions. But for now, in the quiet hospital room, Greer felt a deep sense of peace. They had faced the darkness together, human and canine alike, and emerged not just alive, but triumphant. The evidence was safe, the truth would be told, and most importantly, they had each other. Euthanize stirred slightly in his sleep, his paw twitching as he dreamed. Greer reached down to gentle him, remembering that moment weeks ago when she'd chosen to cap that syringe and give him a chance. She hadn't known then that she was saving her own future guardian angel, but life had a way of revealing its mysteries in time. The evidence they'd preserved would ensure justice was served, but the bond forged in crisis, the unshakable trust between a determined veterinarian, a loyal officer, a brave technician, and one extraordinary three-legged dog, that was the true victory. It would stand as testimony not just to corruption exposed, but to the power of choosing principle over protocol, and the remarkable things that could happen when people refused to look away from what was right. The morning of the county hearing dawned clear and cold. Greer stood before the mirror in her small apartment bathroom, adjusting her blazer and trying to calm her racing heart. Euthanize sat beside her, his paw gently tapping her leg each time her pulse quickened too much. Even now, he remained vigilant about her arrhythmia. "We've got this, buddy," she whispered, scratching behind his ears. "Time to show everyone exactly who you are." The county courthouse loomed ahead as Greer pulled into the parking lot. Reed was already waiting outside, his police uniform crisp, despite the bandage visible at his collar where the smoke inhalation had left its mark. Piper stood beside him, clutching her laptop case and a thick folder of documents. "Everything's ready," Piper assured her, falling into step as they walked toward the entrance. "The video footage is queued up, all the financial records are organized, and I've got 3 separate backups of everything." Inside the hearing room, members of the county board sat in their elevated seats, their expressions serious as they reviewed the preliminary documents. Marla sat at a table on the left, flanked by 2 attorneys. She wore a severe grey suit and kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, refusing to acknowledge their presence. As Greer took her place at the podium, Y13 settled quietly beside her, his presence steady and grounding. She began with the medical evidence, her voice growing stronger as she outlined the truth about cerebellar hyperplasia. The diagnosis was deliberately misrepresented, she explained, displaying brain scan comparisons on the projection screen. Y13's condition causes mild coordination issues, but is neither painful nor progressive. It in no way justifies automatic euthanasia. She carefully moved on to reviewing the security footage from the night of the gas leak. The room fell silent as they watched Y13's precise alerts, his careful guidance toward the source of danger. This dog, labeled as non-functional and scheduled for immediate euthanasia, demonstrated not only his intact training, but his ability to save lives. Piper stepped forward next, methodically walking the board through the financial evidence. Screen after screen showed duplicate forms, forged signatures, and money trails leading back to private accounts. The pattern was undeniable. The more animals euthanized, the more disposal stipends collected, all carefully hidden beneath a veneer of policy compliance. The documentation shows systematic falsification spanning at least 3 years. Piper concluded, her voice firm despite her obvious nervousness. Animals were marked for euthanasia not based on medical necessity or behavioral issues, but on their potential to generate disposal fees. Reed's testimony came next, describing the fire and the sequence of events that led to their narrow escape. The arson investigation confirmed accelerants in multiple locations, he stated, indicating the relevant photos. Security footage shows Director Driscoll entering and leaving the building minutes before the fire was detected. This was a deliberate attempt to destroy evidence and potentially cause harm to witnesses. As Reed finished speaking, Marla suddenly pushed back from her table, her chair scraping loudly across the floor. Her face had gone pale, and her eyes darted towards the exit. Before she could take 2 steps, deputies moved to block her path. "Marla Driscoll," the lead deputy announced clearly. "You are under arrest for arson, fraud, and animal cruelty." The sound of handcuffs clicking shut seemed to echo in the stunned silence of the room. There was no dramatic outburst, no shouted denials. Marla's shoulders simply slumped as the deputies led her away. The weight of evidence, the inescapable truth of her actions, landed with quiet finality. The board's deliberation was brief. Their verdict came down swift and clear: immediate termination of Marla's position, criminal charges to be pursued, and a complete audit of shelter operations to be conducted. In the days that followed, the shelter began its transformation. A temporary director was appointed while a search for permanent leadership commenced. Greer found herself consulted frequently on policy revisions, particularly regarding medical evaluations and euthanasia protocols, but the most significant change came in her personal life. The adoption paperwork for Y13 was processed without a single question or delay. His kennel tag, once a mark of disposability, became a symbol of survival and triumph over a corrupt system. Greer enrolled them both in a medical alert dog training program, formalizing Y13's natural ability to detect her arrhythmia. The trainers were amazed by his instincts and precision, and within weeks he was officially certified as her medical alert companion. Their partnership expanded beyond personal support. Reed, now fully recovered from his injuries, often requested their assistance during hazard inspections. Y13's scent detection abilities proved invaluable in identifying potential dangers, from gas leaks to electrical issues. His presence served as a constant reminder that value often lay hidden beneath surface judgments. The relationship between Greer and Reed deepened naturally, built on shared experiences and mutual respect. Their morning walks became a cherished ritual, a quiet time before the day's demands began. On this particular morning, frost glittered on the grass as they made their way along the river trail. Reed's hand found Greer's, their fingers intertwining with comfortable familiarity. Y13 trotted steadily ahead of them, his three-legged gait sure and confident on the familiar path. His tag jingled softly with each step, catching the early sunlight. He paused occasionally to check back on them, his bright eyes alert but peaceful. "He still amazes me," Reed said softly, watching the dog navigate a gentle slope. "To think how close we came to losing him." Greer squeezed his hand, remembering that crucial moment of decision in the shelter. Sometimes the most important choice is simply refusing to accept what's wrong, even when it seems easier to look away. Y13 circled back to walk beside them, pressing against Greer's leg in his subtle way of monitoring her heart rhythm. She smiled down at him, this extraordinary being who had transformed from a disposable number into the heart of their shared life. The morning stretched ahead of them, full of possibility. The path wound through trees just beginning to show spring buds, and somewhere in the distance, birds called to welcome the day. Here, in this quiet moment, Greer felt the full circle of their journey, from darkness to light, from isolation to connection, from despair to hope. Y13's tag caught the light again as he moved, no longer a mark of shame, but a badge of honor. His story, their story, had become more than just an exposure of corruption. It stood as testimony to the power of seeing worth where others saw weakness, of choosing courage over comfort, and of the extraordinary bonds that could form when hearts opened to unexpected possibilities. Reed's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of Greer's hand as they walked, and Y13's steady presence guided them forward. Together they had forged something precious from the ashes of what was wrong, a new beginning built on truth, trust, and the unshakable certainty that every life held value waiting to be discovered. The morning sun climbed higher, warming their faces as they walked. Y13's paws made soft patterns in the frost, steady and sure, leading them onward into their shared future. In his movement, in their joined hands, in the quiet joy of simply being together, lay the perfect resolution to a journey that had begun with a simple choice to stand for what was right. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.